Somewhere between 40 and 55% of the marriages your parents had ended in divorce. The no-fault divorce laws passed right as you were being born, and the cultural ground shifted beneath a whole generation's feet before they could even walk on it. Researchers call people born between 1970 and 1980 the most overlooked cohort in modern generational psychology. Too young to be boomers, too old to be millennials, but you already knew you didn't fit neatly into anyone's category. You never have. You weren't always this self-contained. There was a version of you, younger, softer, who waited by the window, who came home to a quiet house and figured out how to fill the silence with whatever was available: a television set, a library book, your own imagination running at full speed. You didn't ask anyone for help because functionally there wasn't always anyone to ask, so you built something inside yourself instead, a kind of internal operating system that the adults around you never had to install because someone always installed it for them. But you wrote the code yourself. And here's what nobody tells you about children who do that. They don't grow up to be helpless. They grow up to be fluent in a language most people never learn. In the 1980s, psychologist Emmy Werner conducted a landmark longitudinal study following children raised in high-stress, low-support environments on the island of Kauai. What she found was this: a significant portion of those children, the ones who should have statistically struggled the most, didn't just survive. They developed what Werner called resilience, a psychological elasticity that made them more adaptive under pressure than their peers who had been more protected. She spent 40 years tracking those children. What set them apart wasn't privilege or luck. It was what Werner called a sense of coherence, an internal belief built through repeated self-reliance that the world was manageable and that they were capable of managing it. You built that, quietly, without anyone handing you a trophy for it. And the reason you built it traces back further than you might want to look. Developmental psychologist Diana Baumrind identified a pattern in homes of the late 1970s and early 80s, a shift away from authoritative parenting toward what she called permissive, neglectful styles, not out of cruelty, but out of cultural upheaval. Your parents were the first generation told that personal fulfillment was not selfish, that divorce was liberation, that children were resilient by default, so you were left to prove the theory. And you did prove it, but the cost was that you learned to need very little from other people, not because you are cold, because you are efficient. Your younger self drew a blueprint for survival, and that blueprint said, depend on yourself first, always. It's not a flaw, it's a blueprint your younger self drew to survive. But here's what nobody tells you, and this is the part that deserves honesty. That same blueprint can quietly close doors. Research published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that adults who developed high autonomy in childhood are statistically more likely to underreport emotional needs in intimate relationships, not because they don't have them, but because the neural pathway between feeling a need and expressing it was never fully constructed. The CDC's data on adults currently aged 40 to 55 shows elevated rates of what researchers are calling masked stress accumulation. You look fine on the outside, you function exceptionally well, and you carry more than anyone around you realizes. And because you carry it so well, people rarely think to ask. You have spent decades being the person others lean on, and you have been so good at it that the world forgot to ask if anything is heavy for you. Here's the reframe. A 2019 study out of the University of Rochester found that individuals who developed autonomous coping strategies in childhood demonstrate significantly higher neurological flexibility in mid-adulthood, what researchers are beginning to call adaptive intelligence. You can read a room faster than most people can read a sentence. You've made decisions in ambiguous circumstances that would paralyze someone who is always handed clear answers. You can hold two contradictory truths at once without collapsing, a capacity that psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman links directly to what he calls psychological richness, a dimension of well-being that goes beyond happiness or meaning alone. You didn't just survive the gaps in your upbringing, you became extraordinarily good at navigating gap-filled terrain, and the world right now is full of gaps. Society calls you guarded, it calls you emotionally unavailable, it calls you the forgotten generation and moves on. The real word, the one that actually fits, is self-architected. You didn't receive a finished interior, you built one. That is not emotional damage, that is engineering. And if you're watching this and some quiet part of you is still waiting for someone to officially say it, here it is. The self-sufficiency that sometimes isolates you was not a character flaw that developed because something was wrong with you. It was the most intelligent response available to a child in your exact circumstances. You adapted, you constructed, you endured, and now you are an adult standing on the other side of all of it, still building, still capable of rewriting the blueprint that kept you safe but no longer needs to keep you small. You are allowed to need things now. You are allowed to say what is heavy. You are allowed to receive what you have spent a lifetime giving everyone else. The next step isn't healing the child who came home to an empty house. The next step is letting that child know the house isn't empty anymore. Tell me in the comments, what did you teach yourself that no one ever taught you? You built yourself.